Make sure. Just want to make, because, I'm here. I'm here to make you happy, She's like, going to ignore me, but that's okay. Lord, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for your word, Lord. I thank you for what your word does, because it's a living document, Lord, of your love for us. And I thank you, Lord, that you offer it to us. And Lord, I thank you that we receive it every day, Lord. Every day we learn something new about you, about your pursuit of Israel, about your pursuit of us into your kingdom, Lord. And I thank you for your word. And Lord, let it be a blessing to everyone who listens to it. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're in part 2 of the book of Judges. When Israel had no king is the title of it. So last month we began with the book of Judges, and we learned that Judges continues the story of Joshua. Joshua continued the story of Deuteronomy. And so in Joshua was the conquest of the promised land. Judges is the settlement of the land. And before Joshua died, he and the people renewed their covenant. And that's in Joshua 24, where Joshua says, this is the covenant that the Lord made with us. We're going to keep it. Here is a stone to remind you of this. Are you going to keep it? And the people say, yeah. We'll do that. So they're saying, yeah. We'll keep the covenant. Yeah. We all know better, right? Because they just go on this continuous pattern where they disobey, where they don't keep covenant. But the Lord keeps covenant. So when Joshua dies, he does not name a successor. The Lord does not have him name a successor. Like when Moses died, who was the successor to him? It was Joshua. Joshua was, and the Lord made him great in the eyes of all Israel. But when Joshua dies, there is no successor. They're supposed to rely on the Lord. Well, they start out okay, but their pattern. So in chapter 1, the first few verses, they consult the Lord and who is to go first in the battle. And it's the tribe of Judah who goes along with the tribe of Simeon. And so they start off well. So also in chapter 1, there's a long list of Canaanite groups, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Armenians, the Midianites, and the Philistines, that Israel fails to drive out of the land. The Lord has given this land to them. They are to drive them out, but they don't. And so the whole point of driving them out of the land was to avoid their influence of their moral corruption and the worship of their detestable gods, especially the ones like Moloch, which was about child sacrifice, and the Baals and the Asherahs, which is about really sexual depravity, detestable things that they did. So God has called them to be a holy people because he's a holy God. But you don't even recognize them from the people of the land. They are just like the people of the land. Instead of being a unique nation, they look just like everyone else. Chapter 2 describes how Israel dwelt among the Canaanites. It's supposed to be the opposite. The Canaanites can dwell among them, not the opposite. Because who really has the land? It's really the Canaanites, not the Israelites, because they failed to drive them out. And what happens? They begin to adopt their cultural and detestable religious practices. And it's supposed to be the other way around. The Canaanites are supposed to adopt theirs. So one of the key moments in chapter 2 is that an angel of the Lord visits them in Bokim, which means weeping, and reminds them that God has always kept his covenant. But because they don't uphold their end of the covenant, God is no longer going to drive the Canaanites out. In fact, he's going to leave them in place to test them. And we see this in Exodus 23. We see this in Numbers 33. The second thing that happens, it's basically a rehash of talking about where Joshua has died. So they talk about his death. They recount his death. And, Joshua's died at the age of 110 years old, and there's no leader left. So they're supposed to go and do. So chapter 2 is really a rehash. The third is as they turn from God, they start to serve the Baals and the Asherahs. One of the key verses is verse 19. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who had lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them, and they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. This is why this little chart is in your packet, where it shows this vicious cycle of rejection, of them rejecting God, his decrees, his commands, and him giving in and basically having mercy for them, that he raises up a deliverer for them. And this becomes a vicious cycle. And this is what the whole book of Judges is really all about. Chapter 3, the key verse here is Judges 3:7. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. They forgot about the Lord their God, and they served the images of Baal and the Asherah poles. There they go again. They keep doing this vicious thing. And so the Lord basically sells them into the hands of their oppressors. They cry out to God. He raises up judges or deliverers to save Israel from their oppressors, starting with Othniel, which was Caleb's nephew, and then Ehud, who was a left-handed man from Benjamin, and Shamgar, who got one verse in that whole chapter, who killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. An ox goad. And so after Ehud dies and all that, they at least have a relative amount of peace for like 80 years. When Othniel dies, there's 40 years, and then of course they sin again, and the Lord gives them into the hands of Moab, and then Ehud comes along, and for 80 years there's some peace. They don't really say how long Shamgar had, but he too delivered Israel. Chapter 4, we see one of the only females, Deborah, who is not only a judge, but she also is a prophet, but she's also the only one who actually, the role of an arbitrator, as a judge, as what we would kind of see as a judge today. But she's also a deliverer, though. Uncommon for a woman to be doing it. Very uncommon for a woman to do, but God raised up Deborah. And he also had Barak, who was a warrior, to destroy King Jabin's Canaanite army. The glory, however, is going to go to who? Another woman named Yael, who was the wife of Heber the Canaanite for killing Sisera, the Canaanite general, who was despicable. So when he dies, there's reason to celebrate, okay? With a tent peg. And so they live in peace for about 40 years. In chapter 5, Deborah and Barak sing about their victory over the Canaanites, which is really meant to be a mockery of the Canaanites not being able to stand victorious. And they praise Yahweh. They praise the Israelite warriors. And of course, they give Yael praise. But they scold the tribes that failed to join in on the fight. Not all the tribes joined in. Some of them just held back, decided not to join in. And we also learn a few details about the battle, about how the chariots got all bogged up, about how Sisera's mother was waiting for him to return, and he doesn't return because, well, he's dead. Because she's thinking he's going to return with all the booty, but it's taken him that long to return with all the booty and all that, but he's dead. So we learned something in the song. So in chapter 6 tonight, we're going to go over Gideon and his son Abimelech. So, verse 1 to 6 in chapter 6. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. Okay, here's that vicious cycle again. We're doing it again. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from the Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying crops as far away as Gaza. And if you remember Gaza, of course, Gaza's been in the news lately. Gaza's right over in here, in this section here. So the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all them have been moving right in and taking the crops of the Israelites. And this goes on for 7 years. So every spring, here they come to take their crops. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. These enemy hordes coming with their livestock and tents were as thick as locusts, and they arrived on droves of camels too numerous to count. And they stayed until the land was stripped bare. This is how oppressive Israel is under. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites, and then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. They've had several years of peace, but they fall back into that vicious little cycle.
Where were the Midianites located? All of Israel or just?
Well, they came in. They were nomadic people, so they came in this way, and they came in this way. Yeah. They came in, they took whatever. So that's how they worked. So what do we see again? You know, they're 40 years, they have the prosperity, but what happens? They fall into that complacency. They start resting on their laurels and thinking that they can do without God. And, well, of course, what happens? They fall into that idolatry again. Verse 7 to 10. Then they cried out to the Lord because of the Midian. The Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. We don't know who this prophet is, okay? And I guess it doesn't matter because the message is what's important here. And this is what he said. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of the slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship, or in some translations will say, fear the gods of the Amorites. Fear as in hold them in awe and worship. In whose land you now live, but you have not listened to me. He reminds them, once again, why they're in the detestable state that they're in. Because it's not God, it's they not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So he sends the unnamed prophet. We don't know who the prophet is. We never know who the prophet is, but it's the message behind it. And so verse 11, 13. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under an oak tree in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel... No. And in fact, I'm going to go over that just in a minute here. No, it's all right. The winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And you're right, it was not normal. Here's a picture of a threshing floor when you do wheat. It has to be out in the open. You have to allow some air to come through. You throw things up in the air. The wind comes and takes the shaft, which blows away, and the harder things falls down. And they keep doing this, and they keep doing this. Gideon, if you see in your little picture, the wine press is this little place. And he's in there. And this is a ridiculous looking scene when you think about it, okay? He's hiding pretty much in a cave, in a wine press, threshing wheat. Not wine, but wheat. But why is he doing this, of course? Because the Midianites have been coming in to take everything. So he has to do this in hiding, even though it's a difficult process to do because you kind of need the wind to do it. But, so he's making it even harder. But this is what they've been reduced to. Okay, so we continue on with, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. So the angel of the Lord has said that to Gideon. Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? See, they failed to remember that God keeps his covenant. They have to keep theirs. So why is this happening to us? Well, Gideon, yes, they've told you about the great miracles because you see right here he says, where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Yes, they reminded them of all the goodness, but they failed to mention the part that they were supposed to do. Keep his decrees, keep his commands. Don't go into, the land and take on their worship of their false gods. Honor me, honor the Lord. So which is interesting because you would think, if that were me that he was talking to, I'd go, well, we can go back here and say, this is what you were supposed to do, but this is what you did not do. But look at what the angel of the Lord does. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. He doesn't engage in the conversation. He does not. Notice that he just says, just go in the strength. You're going to rescue Israel. Okay, so he doesn't engage in it. Unlike with some of us would like, wait a minute. Let's have a review here. And we can kind of do that for ourselves. But anyways, but Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I'm the least in my entire family. The Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. That's the kind of strength that he's going to be empowered with, okay? So the Lord is just going to keep pressing Gideon, even though Gideon is showing some reluctance, some skepticism. Very similar to Moses. I'm glad you pointed that out because every time I kept thinking of how Moses kept saying, oh, I stutter, or I do this, I do that. But let's see what else he does here. Gideon replied to him, if I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who speaks to me. Please do not depart from here until I come back to you and bring an offering and place it before you. And the angel said, I will wait until you return. Then Gideon went and prepared a young goat. So apparently there was a young goat for him to prepare. And unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. So there was apparently enough food for him to be able to do this. Okay? The meat he put in a basket and the broth in a pot. And he brought the food to him under the oak and presented it. Then the angels of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth over them. And he did so. And the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire flared up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. So Gideon, of course, with his conversing with the angel, he's trying to verify a message, whether or not this is really happening, okay? And when we talked about Moses and how Moses was trying to get out of things, this is really what Gideon's also going to try to do. He's either going to try to verify the message is coming from the Lord, or he's hoping to prove the opposite so he can just not have to do anything, okay? So, verse 22 to 24. When Gideon realized it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, O sovereign Lord, I am doomed. I have seen the angel of the Lord's face to face. It is all right, the Lord replied. Do not be afraid. You will not die. And Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. The altar remains in Ophrah in the land of the clan of Abiezer to this day. Okay, so you've probably seen this a couple of times in Exodus. You've seen it, and you're going to see it again in Judges when it comes to the story of Samson, where people think that they're going to die because they've spoken to the Lord face to face or everything. Because that is what, in the book of Exodus, this was a very common thing. They had grown up with this because if you remember Moses, can I see you face to face? And the Lord said, no. I'll walk by you. I'll put you in the cleft of the rock. You'll see my back, but you will not see me face to face, lest you die. So that is where that comes from. Okay. And that was a fear because they thought for sure if that happened that they would be doomed and they would die. But the Lord says, don't be afraid. It's okay. Verse 25 to 27. That night the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, and the one that is 7 years old. Pull down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah poles standing beside it. Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar. Use as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down." So Gideon took 10 of his servants. 10 servants, mind you, he must be from a prosperous family. 10 servants, okay? And he did as the Lord commanded. But he did it at night, because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. So he's going to do it under the cover of night. Why? Well, it probably has some fear against his, or maybe he just fears somebody's going to stop him from doing it. So there's a possibility there. Early the next morning, as the people of the town began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal had been broken down and that the Asherah pole beside it had been cut down. In their place, a new altar had been built, and on it were the remains of the bull that had been sacrificed. The people said to each other, "Who did this?" And after asking around and making a careful search, they learned that it was Gideon, the son of Joash. Well, folks, you have 10 people who went with you to do this. Of course it's going to get out. It's not going to be a secret. I mean, somebody, well, unless you're sworn in secret, but somebody's going to, and it's a small town, so yeah. I just do love this. Who did this? So after asking around and careful search, they learned that it was Gideon, the son of Joash. "Bring out your son," the men of the town demanded of Joash. "He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and cutting down the Asherah pole." Now keep in mind, they want to put him to death for cutting down the pole. And the Asherah pole, it's just this pole this is where they would practice their sexual depravity. Okay, and then you had Baal. Yeah, you look it up, it's pretty interesting, but they cut that down. But the Israelites knew that if they worshiped this, they were supposed to be put to death for doing that, for worshiping Baal and the Asherah poles and all the Amorite gods. Huh?
Was there anything on the pole?
I don't know specifically, but that's something you'd have to look up, okay? But no, that's okay. But they want to put him to death for cutting down this pole and destroying the altar of Baal. And so, but Joash shouted at the mob and confronted them. "Why are you defending Baal? Why will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal is truly God, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down this altar." So Joash defends his son, doesn't give in to them saying, "No, we're going to kill your son because he did this." He just says, and this is what he says, From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means "let Baal defend himself," because he broke down Baal's altar. So Joash stands up for his son and says to them, "Let Baal defend himself." Do you guys remember who else did something like this? You remember Elijah? In the book of Kings, when they had all the prophets and they say, speak up louder, maybe he's in the toilet or something. It's that type of thing. It's that same type of thing. Okay, so he had 10 servants, so somebody, of course, is going to spill the beans, obviously. Okay, obviously didn't swear him to secrecy, but my grandmother used to say, if 2 people know your secret, then your secret is really out there, because you just don't know. The only way to keep a secret is to keep it secret. Okay, so the ancient Israel worshiped Baal because he was thought to be a god of weather and relied on the weather for agricultural prosperity. So in the difficult economic times, the Midianite oppression, the people worshiped Baal even more, not understanding that they only made things worse by not turning to God. And so, it looked pretty good to them, so that's why they went after it, okay? I always said if it's a sinful thing, it's always the easiest path to get there. The walk in the fine line, that's the hard path to do. So, verse 33-35. Soon afterward, the armies of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east formed an alliance against Israel and crossed the Jordan, camping in the valley of Jezreel. Jezreel is going to be once again, here's Jezreel. Jezreel is going to be in the final battle of Armageddon. It's going to be there. This is a very famous place. Then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. I like how he says it, clothed Gideon with power. He came upon him with power. And he blew a ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men of the clan of Abiezer came to him. He also sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, summoning all the warriors, and all of them responded. So this is obviously about the time of spring, because you have the marauders coming to try to take everything. And this time, this is not going to happen because he is clothed with the supernatural power of the Holy Spirit on him. So in verse 36 and 40, then Gideon said to God, if you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you have promised, prove it to me in this way. I will put a wool fleece on the threshing floor tonight. If the fleece is wet with dew in the morning, but the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to help me rescue Israel as you promised. You've heard this story. You've heard like Tammy, throwing out the fleece. So this is where it comes from. And that was just what happened. When Gideon got up early the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out a whole bowl full of water. And then Gideon said to God, please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time, let the fleece remain dry while the ground around it is wet with dew. See, this is still his way trying to get out of this. Okay, he's still trying to get out of this. No, we certainly haven't. Not one darn bit. Yes. So that night, God did as Gideon asked. The fleece was dry in the morning, but the ground was covered with dew. So Gideon is showing that his faith is a bit weak right now. Okay, he sees himself as the least in his family. He sees his clan as the least of the clans and of the tribes. And so he keeps asking for a first sign and then a second sign. And well, in this day and age, because you got the enemy screaming much louder, okay, yeah, you do want confirmation, but there's a point where God will just say, do it. And so this is what he's learning. Then Gideon and all the people who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Herod. This is chapter 7, verse 1 to 3, sorry. And the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. Then the Lord said to Gideon, there are too many people with you for me to hand over Midian to them. Otherwise, Israel will boast about themselves against me, saying, my own power has rescued me. So now proclaim in the hearing of the people, whoever's afraid and trembling, let him turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men returned home, but 10,000 remained. So if you're scared, you're afraid, you're trembling, just go back home. And some people were like, the door didn't even hit them on the way out. It was gone, okay? So God wants the odds so bad that he's going to get the glory for this. In verse 48, but the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the men down to the water. Now keep in mind, this is probably an all-day event, because got 10,000 people going to a watering hole. So this is going to be kind of an all-day event. And then the Lord told them, okay, Gideon took the men down the water, and then there the Lord told them, separate those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cup hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give you the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So he's left with 300 because of the way they drank. If it had been the opposite, he would have done the same. He wants the odds in his favor, not Israel's favor. And some people say, the way they drank is because they were more mindful of what was going on. especially in the battle scene, you want to be more mindful of what's going on. That was something they taught us in basic training and all that when we were to go like to the porta-johns. One would stay guard with the person's weapon and the other one got to use the bathroom, but you were always, which is always, yeah, and that's what they want, but then you see water, you get happy, you go for it, this is what happens. But anyways, God wants the odds in his favor. So verse 9 and 14. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up and go against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, so he understands Gideon very well, okay? If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling of his friend of the dream. And, just in time. I love this. God just orchestrates this whole thing. It's just so beautifully perfect. He orchestrates this. And just the man's telling his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. I mean, just in time for him to hear that story, you'd be like, wait a minute, what are the chances of this really happening, that I'm hearing that this is going to happen? Okay, so he's taking a humble nobody. Gideon thinks he's just a nobody, and God is going to use him. And he hears this, these two strangers talking about what he's going to do. So verse 15, 18. When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshiped. Then he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hand. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies and put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside of the pitchers. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the edge of the camp, do just as I do. That's going to be your signal. When I and all those who are with me blow the trumpet, then all around the camp you also blow the trumpets and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So what are they going with? They're not going with swords, obviously. They can't carry it, at least if they've got it here on their side, but they've got the torch and they've got the trumpet. And so verse 19 to 23. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, which is one of the nights. The military usually has like 3-4 hour watches. And so this was in the middle of the night. When the guards had been changed, they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. When the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, and they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow, they shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And the minute that word comes out, it's like the angels go in there. That's how I see it, that the angels just go. It's almost like they're saying go. So a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Then each stood in his place around the camp. The entire Midianite army ran crying out as they fled. So the guys are still standing there, trumpet, and your torch, and your torch. So, and they just say a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And it's almost like the word of the Lord goes out, and the angel forces just go right to it, because what happens? When Gideon's men blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set out a sword of one Midianite against another, even throughout the whole army. They turn it on themselves. And the army fled as far as Beth-sittah towards Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Meloha by Tabith. Oh my gosh. The men of Israel were summoned together from the tribes of Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. So this is in the middle of the night. Some people are probably dead asleep, enjoying, because remember, this is not like today where there's ambient light. The only ambient light there would be is probably the torches from the camps. So they don't have all these other lights. But they come in and they attack swiftly, with speed, and with just brutal force. And it's not even them doing it. They blow those horns, and it's enough of a chaotic moment for someone getting out of a dead sleep. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going after anybody. You're coming out of a sleep. Because, like, I go back to my basic training days when they deprived you of your sleep. And they took you out to the camps, and you had to switch out night watch. And so someone would wake you up because it's your turn to do night watch. You're disoriented, completely disoriented, because you only had an hour or two sleep. Okay, because that's what they could do to you. They can deprive you of your sleep. Okay, so this is what happens here. They use that disorientation. And of course, the angels go to work. Boom. Okay, the word of the Lord. A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. And that's what happens. They turn the swords on themselves. Verse 24, 25. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of the tribe of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and take control of the waters before them, therefore cutting off the Midianites as far as Beth-barah in the Jordan River. So all the men of Ephraim were assembled together, and they took control of the waters as far as Beth-barah in the Jordan. Then the men of Ephraim took the two leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeeb, and they killed Oreb on the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeeb at the winepress of Zeeb, and pursued Midian. And they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. And there's a little map there of the whole battle site and where they went. So we're in chapter 8, 1-3. Then the people of Ephraim asked Gideon, why have you treated us this way? Why didn't you send for us when you first went out to fight the Midianites? This is still a typical thing this day and age. You get people who do all the work, they get credit for it, it's a success, and then the people who did nothing, wanted nothing to do with it, come along and say, how come you didn't call us? Okay, it still happens to this day. But this is what they're doing. Well, how come you didn't call us? Well, first of all, what makes them think that God was going to allow them to join? Because remember, he was reducing the numbers. So there's that. And if they had come along, God would have probably told them to go back. So, and they argue, and we're still doing it today. Well, yep. God, you need me to help you with this. Here, do my plan. Yeah, where does that get us? It does not work. They argue heatedly with Gideon, but Gideon replied, and he does this diplomatically, okay? What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't even the leftover grapes from Ephraim harvest better than the entire crop of my little clan, Abiezer? God gave you victory over Oreb and Zeeb, the commanders of the Midianite army. What have I accomplished compared to that? And when the men of Ephraim heard Gideon's answer, their anger subdued. Okay, so they're upset that they didn't get called into the battle before it started, but we of course know God would have probably said, no, you're not going to be there because I'm sending you home. There's that, okay? And so you have to ask yourself, would God have allowed it? Maybe not. Probably not at all, because remember, God wanted the odds in his favor, not theirs. And so Gideon speaks like a seasoned diplomat. You see Gideon growing here. He's getting a little more confident, okay? He's growing a little more confident. He's starting to recognize that God is with him. So he uses what diplomats use, distraction and flattery, or we like to call BS, okay? That's what he does. He does this. Okay, he gets out of a big confrontation, he downplays his role. He downplays his men's role. He kind of gives them more of the credit, Ephraim more of the credit. Well, you got the Midianite kings, okay? And he almost even downplays God's role in this, okay? Verse 4-9. Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. And he said to the men of Zukkoth, give my troops some bread. They are worn out, and I have been pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. But the officials of Zukkoth said, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops? Then Gideon replied, just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah, now he goes from not if the Lord, he goes to when the Lord. See, his confidence is growing. Given Zebah, and Zebah's name means victim, sacrifice. And Zalmunna, his name means withdrawn from protection, deprived of shade. Into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars. From there, he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them. But they answered as the men of Sukkoth. So he said to the men of Peniel, here we go again, when I return in triumph, I will tear down this tower. So he is definitely growing stronger. And I think he's starting to get a sense that, hey, we can do this. I can do this. The Lord is with me. We can do this. And he's starting to get a little bit of a backbone. He's gone from the reluctant warrior to now he's full on. He's all in now. He is all in. He's saying when, not if. So he knows he's coming back. Okay, kind of like Abraham and Isaac. We're going to go sacrifice and then we'll be back. Just knew they were coming. Verse 10-12. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men. All that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. And 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. That's how many had died. Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jobobah and attacked an unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings of Midian, fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their armies. So Gideon is, like I said, he's all in. Now he is persistent. He is dogged. He is going after these guys. He's a completely different man than when he was when we first see him in chapter 6, hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat, okay? Totally different guy. Verse 13-17. Gideon, the son of Joash, then returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He caught a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. Then Gideon came and said to the men of Succoth, here is Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me by saying, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men? He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Zukkoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town. Part of the reason why he does this is that instead of helping their fellow Israelites, they took sides with the enemy. This is why he really is going after them, because they won't help the other Israelites to take care of this oppressive enemy. They take sides with the enemy and not with Israelite. And Gideon just feels, well, you're going to do that? This is what I'm going to do. So he told them, when I come back, and here I am, what are you going to say now? Yeah, he already spoke. He spoke it into action. It's kind of like today. What are you going to say now? What are you going to say now? When people trash talk each other, now what are you going to say? I see this quite a bit when the guys at work, they do this little bantering with each other. What are you going to say now? So here we go. But I have to put up with a lot. Young men here. I just do my thing. Yeah, I do. 18-21. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? They answered, as you, so were they. Each one resembled a son of a king. And then Gideon said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. And as the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. And he said to his son Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a youth. Now there's a reason why Gideon's trying to do this. Because a warrior, especially at this time, the more noble and bigger name a warrior was killed by, the more the glorious story, okay? To be killed by a young boy who's never drawn blood would be humiliating. It would be a humiliating story. But Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Now, these are Eastern people. The crescent. Well, remember what the crescent is. What is that? Not the Ishmaelites, but you got the Shias and now I'm just totally forgetting. But the crescent moon is part of a lot of their Iran, Iraq, and all that. They have that crescent moon, which goes back to that time, by the way. So, okay. So, could you imagine this day and age, Gideon saying to his son, kill him? This would not go well in today's society, okay? But back in that time, it was kind of a norm, but this guy was too young, never had the training, I guess you can say, but it was basically to humiliate these two kings, to be struck down by a boy and not by a true warrior. Verse 22-27, the Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian. Notice what he said there. You have saved us. What are they doing? They're forgetting God. They're going right back into this whole terrible thing again. But Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And he said, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. It was a custom of the Ishmaelites to wear golden earrings. They answered, we'll be glad to give them. So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring from his plunder into it. This is supposed to remind you of Aaron when Moses goes up the mountain. And what does he do? They build the camp, which was with earrings and such. And so they spread out a garment, each of them may throw a ring from this plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to about 1,700 shekels, which is about 43 pounds, not counting the ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah in his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. The ephod, is usually made of, it's the high priest, what he wore, is usually made of linen, but he makes this of gold. And what happens? They do it again. They worship what he made. It was usually made of linen, and it had in it gold, and they had the stones here, but he makes this of gold. And what does the Israelites do? They go back to worshiping the object, not God. They go back to worshiping that. And so here we go. So the Israelites give Gideon credit for saving them rather than giving the glory to God. God whittled down Gideon's original army down to 300 men because he did not want Israel to conclude that they had saved themselves. But this is exactly what they do. They say, Gideon, you saved us. God wants to be the one recognized for it. The glory should be his, and it should always be his. So they're driven by emotion rather than by reason. And so this is why they're trying to get Gideon to be king and all that. And Gideon, of course, does the right thing and says, no, it can't be this way. But then he builds this ephod, which, of course, they come along and worship, which was what they were not supposed to do. Remember, he started with him tearing down the idols, and now they've got another idol. Ugh. So, verse 28-35. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. Gideon, the son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, and had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son named Abimelech, which my father is king, is the name of Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal Berioth, which means the Lord of the covenant, as their god, and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of their enemies on every side. Here we go again. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Gideon, in spite of all the good things that he had done for them. Okay? He didn't want to be a king, but he certainly lived like a king. 70 sons and the concubines and the wives and such. So he certainly enjoyed the luxury of a king, that's for sure. Now, chapter 9, we go to the story of Abimelech, his son, verse 1-3. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, which is Gideon, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem, and said to them, and to all his mother's clan, so he's going to his uncles, ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Gideon's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood. This would be like someone who's going to run for president or something, go to their family and say, I'm your family member, so you got to vote for me. May not have anything in common with them, but since we're related, you got to do it. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, well, he is related to us. There you go. Here we go. Things are just going to go bad. Oh. Verse 4-6. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berioth, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, thugs basically, and they followed him. And they went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Gideon, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together at Beth Milo, which is the house of fullness, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. So he basically, like in any power struggle, you eliminate your rivals. And it doesn't matter if it's half-brothers, he just goes ahead and eliminates them. So verse 7-15. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim. And we learned this in Deuteronomy, that's where the Lord gave blessings on Mount Gerizim. And shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, be our king. But the olive tree answered, should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees? Next the tree said to the fig tree, come, be our king. But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees? Then the trees said to the vine, come, be our king. And the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush. Remember, the thorn bush is on the ground. It's the lowest. Come, be our king. And the thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. A thorn bush. What kind of shade are you going to get with a thorn bush? Not very much. But if not, let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Okay, so he's telling a fable. He's trying to make a point. Who was the first tree supposed to be? The olive tree. They wanted Gideon to be king. Okay, and then be his son, and then they wanted to start a dynasty, and Gideon was saying no to it. Verse 16-21. Have you acted, this is still Jotham, okay? Have you acted honorably in good faith by making Abimelech king? Have you been fair to Gideon and his family? Have you treated him as he deserves? Remember that my father fought for you and risked his life to rescue you from the hands of Midian. But today you have revolted against my father's family. You have murdered his 70 sons on a single stone and have made Abimelech, the son of his female slave, king over the citizens of Shechem, because he is related to you. So if you have acted honorably and in good faith toward Gideon and his family today, have you acted honorably in good faith toward Gideon and his family today? If you have, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But, big but here, if you have not, let fire come out of Abimelech and consume you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo, and let fire come out from you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. Okay, he's speaking a prophecy now. Now, what's going to happen? Verse 22-25. After Abimelech had ruled over Israel for 3 years, God sent a spirit that stirred up trouble between Abimelech and the leading citizens of Shechem, and they revolted. Kind of sounds like what's going on with a certain guy who thinks he's president. People are revolting against him. That spirit is there now. I love seeing the parallels here. Oh, where was I? Okay, revolt. And God punishing Abimelech for murdering Gideon's 70 sons, and the citizens of Shechem for supporting him in this treachery of murdering his brothers. The citizens of Shechem sent an ambush for Abimelech on the hilltops and robbed everyone who passed that way. But someone warned Abimelech about their plot. Okay, so the reason why Abimelech is not considered a judge is because he was not appointed to be a judge. He basically took control of that. And he doesn't save Israel at all. He kind of creates chaos for them is what he does. Okay? Verse 26-29. One day Gaal, son of Ebed, moved to Shechem with his brothers and gained the confidence of the leading citizens of Shechem. The stirring up is still going on here. During the annual harvest festival at Shechem, held in the temple of the local god, wine flowed freely. Here comes the wine. What happens to wine? Loose lips. Here we go. And everyone began cursing Abimelech. Who is Abimelech? Gaal shouted. Is he not a true son of Shechem? So why should we be his servants? Merely the son of Gideon, and this Zebul is merely his deputy. Serve the true sons of Hamor, the founder of Shechem. Why should we serve Abimelech? If I were in charge here, I would get rid of Abimelech. I would say to him, get some soldiers and come out and fight. Oh boy. So got the wine flowing, got the mouths flowing, you're boasting. Okay, here we go. Verse 30-33. Then Zebul, the leader of the city, heard what Gaal was saying, and he was furious. He sent messengers to Abimelech, telling him, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to live in Shechem, and now they are inciting the city to rebel against you. Come by night with an army and hide out in the fields. In the morning, as soon as it's daylight, attack the city. When Gaal and those who are with him come out against you, you can do with them as you wish. Okay, so they do this. Verse 34-41. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him go up at night and set up an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. So we've got 400 men going. Now Gaal and the son of Ebed came out and stood in the entrance of the city gate. Then Abimelech and the people who were with him got up from the ambush. And Gaal saw the people and said to Zebul, look, there are people coming down from the mountaintops. But Zebul said to him, you're seeing things. You're seeing the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. He's trying to lie to him. He's trying to distract him. He's trying not to, because obviously he knows something's up. And Abimelech is trying to take advantage of the situation here. Gaal spoke to him again and said, look, people are coming down from the highest part of the land, and one company is coming by way of the sorcerer's oak tree. Then Zebul said to Gaal, where is your boasting mouth now? Yeah, you've been talking. Now, where is it now? You said, 'Who is this Abimelech that we should serve him? Is it not the people whom you despise? Go out now and fight them.' So Gaal went out. He has to go now, doesn't he? So Gaal went out ahead of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. Many fell wounded as far as the entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech stayed at Arumah, and Zubal drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not remain in Shechem. The next day the people went out to the field, and it was reported to Abimelech. So he took the people and divided them into 3 companies and set an ambush in the field. He looked and saw the people coming out of the city. He rose up against them and struck them down. Then Abimelech and the company with him advanced forward and stood in the entrance of the city gate. The 2 other companies attacked all who were in the field and killed them. Abimelech fought against the city that entire day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it. He demolished the city, sowed it with salt. And what does salt do to the ground? Makes it unbearable to be able to plant. And that's what he did. I mean, he is going full tilt on this. Verse 46 to 49. Then all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard about it. They entered the inner chamber, the stronghold of the temple of El-Berith, the god of the covenant, which is their false god. Abimelech was told that all the leaders of the tower of Shechem were assembled together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees, picked it up and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the people with him, "What you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have done." So everyone of the people also cut down a branch and followed Abimelech. And they put the branches on top of the inner chamber and set it on fire over those inside. So basically, they're going to burn to death in the tower. So the people, about 1,000 men and women, all died here. Verse 50 to 57. Now Abimelech attacked the town of Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower inside the town, and the men and women and the entire population fled to it. They barricaded themselves in and climbed up to the roof of the tower. And Abimelech followed them to attack the tower. He's full of confidence now. I mean, he's going to make a bonehead mistake here. But as he prepared to set fire to the entrance, a woman on the roof dropped a millstone that landed on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Now, this millstone is the upper millstone. It's a smaller millstone. It's about 25 pounds. It's not the big millstone, because that would be one big thing. Even though those women were pretty tough in those days, but she drops it on his head. He quickly said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me. Don't let it be said that a woman killed Abimelech." So the young man ran him through with his sword, and he died. When Abimelech's men saw that he was dead, they disbanded and returned to their homes. In this way, God punished Abimelech for the evil he had done against his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also punished the men of Shechem for all their evil. So the curse of Jotham, son of Gideon, was fulfilled that very day. What's interesting about that particular story, you hear about the woman of Thebez in the story of 2 Samuel 11, verse 14 to 21, when David writes a letter to Joab, and Uriah has not gone to his wife. Remember Bathsheba and David, they do the deed. She gets pregnant. He's going to try to cover it up. He gets Uriah back. Go ahead, have your time with her. He doesn't do it. So Uriah goes back into the battle. And what does David do? He tells Joab, send him into the thickest part of the battle. And he uses the story as a code word, as a way to tell him that Uriah is dead. And this is how it goes. So the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. Uriah is going to deliver his own death sentence, okay? The letter instructed Joab, station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is the fiercest. Then pull back so that he will be killed. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where they knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy soldiers came down out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed along with several other Israelite soldiers. Then Joab sent a battle report to David, and he told his messenger, "Report all the news of the battle to the king." But he might get angry and ask, "Why did the troops get so close to the city? Didn't they know that there would be shooting from the walls? Wasn't Abimelech, the son of Gideon, killed at the Bez by a woman who threw the millstone down on him from the wall? Why would you get so close to the wall? Then tell him Uriah the Hittite was killed." That was a code word. That was a code for David to know that, okay, Uriah's dead, I'm safe. He uses that story right there. Bada bang, and that ends tonight's lesson.
That was awesome, Jerry. I got all kinds of stuff to look at tomorrow.
But I love that story there. I love the code. That's a good story. But those women had to be tough. She just, don't let a woman kill me. But that's what happens. Several generations later, it's the woman who killed them. Yeah.
I mean, and just at the first of the story with what's her name with the 10.
Yeah, exactly. See? Don't mess with God's women. Especially a woman scorned. Ooh. Yes. Ooh. But anyways, until next time, folks.
Well, that was awesome.
I love that little story. Yeah, Gail's up there.